Hi everyone, welcome to our fifth SAWSA lecture this year. We are really happy to have you here. Today we have a very special guest, Lisa Finlay from Heatherwick Studio, and we're really happy to have you here. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us. We also have Jessamine with us who help us organize the lecture, so thank you very much for your help again and helping us organize this event. At the very end of the lecture, there will be a quick Q&A, so please drop your questions in the chat box throughout the lecture and we'll help to answer as much of them as possible. So without further ado, we'll head off to Lisa.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks very much for inviting me. Hope you're all doing well. I can't imagine what it's like trying to do your course from home and in lockdown and everything, so full respect to you all. I can imagine it's very difficult for you. Yeah, really interesting topic that you've asked me to talk about today. So it's on the theme of how architects can use design to tackle social problems. And we had to think about some of the work that we've done, and there was a particular project that we thought might be of interest to you. It's more of a kind of strategic thinking project rather than a building design project. But we thought that it might go some way to address the topic that you're looking at. And it's a piece of work we did related to the justice system. And we did the project over about 2 years on and off, working with a philanthropist, a prison philanthropist. And I thought I'd start off, first of all, just talking a little bit about us. So this is our studio. I'm one of the partners at the studio. My name's Lisa Finlay. I'm a partner and group leader there. And this is all of us based in King's Cross when we could all be together like that. And you may know us for the kind of work that we do, which is across lots of typologies, lots of scales, lots of disciplines, from furniture to objects to buildings to transport. So we really like to explore anything really. I think we don't like to kind of get siloed down a particular type of project. So we're very interested in exploring the boundaries between projects and disciplines, I think. And in all of our work, I think we're very interested in the public nature of projects. So to take an example, this is one of the projects that we completed over the last few years, and it's a transformation of a historic but redundant grain silo in South Africa, and transformed this space into Africa's first international museum dedicated to contemporary African art. So it's a really special project for us, where we got to see how a structure like that could come to life by all the people that come to use it. We're very interested also in the public spaces that we create in and around the buildings that we work on. So this is Coldrop's Yard, that is a retail destination. Again, it's the transformation of existing structures, but it's also a project that creates a lot of outdoor space, a lot of different kinds of outdoor spaces, and we're very interested in how all those spaces have been occupied. Coldrops was very interesting because we had a whole range of very small units to large units and spaces for different retailers to try different things, and we're interested in kind of the smaller details of projects and how people really interact with them and the kind of human experience of them. So things down to lift buttons we're always interested in. And there's themes in our work that relate around the integration of nature, around identity, of really a real strong interest in the materials in our projects. And we've found that those projects are, of course, very important in any project that we do, but even more so in projects where the building might have a caring role in society. So this is the Maggie's Centre that was opened last year in Leeds, and this is a building that has a very strong caring role. It's a cancer care centre, and it is a very special project for us because of the journey we went through on the design process. And that journey started with a very interesting brief. And the brief was very straightforward in some ways. It had the straightforward things like, we need capacity for 110 visitors a day. We need 4 counselling rooms. We need a kitchen. We need a library. We need an exercise room, all those kinds of things. But it also had statements like this that were very, very powerful as a designer to kind of stop and read this kind of thing. So it's talked about a home that people would not have dared to build themselves. And those are the kind of statements that make you think, right, we have to really think about how the culmination of all the materials that we put together, the spaces we create, are going to impact how somebody might feel in this space. And for Maggie Centres in particular, the way people, the ideal is that people feel that they can open up to some of the difficulties they're experiencing through a cancer diagnosis. And it's really important that the physical space allows that kind of discussion and to take place. So another statement in there was a space where people can perceive themselves differently. And again, a really interesting statement to think, what kind of places really make you feel like that? But for us, it was really a concentration on how people move through the space to kind of avoid as many corridors, as many kind of classic circulation moves as you possibly could. Just make it a very free flowing space, a very warm space. And we worked very hard with the design of the timber structure. So here you've got the within this image here, behind that kind of timber mushroom, are the counselling rooms where you have one-to-one counselling inside, and so they kind of are concealed away, but they're also form part of the kitchen space as well. So this was a really special project for us, and it kind of led us to the Reinvent project, which I'm going to talk about. But just to mention this book, I don't know if any of you are aware of it, The Architecture of Hope, but that is kind of what the Maggie's project set out to do. They set out to create a space where you can be hopeful, you could say. And we got to learn a lot from the CEO of Maggie's through this project, Laura Lee, and it was very interesting hearing how they set out the Maggie Centres, where, you know, when they set out to build the first one, there was a sort of idea that, you know, just to receive good healthcare, or, you know, a good treatment was enough, and they didn't feel that was enough. They felt that the environment really had to be part of the experience, and the experience was so essential in trying to deal with all the difficulties and complex emotions that you can experience with a cancer diagnosis. So that's how that journey began. And when we started this project, so this is the project I'd like to talk about and how it evolved into a pilot project. We started to work with Lady Edwina Grosvenor, who is a prison philanthropist. So her work has revolved around prison reform and exploring ways to reduce the prison population, and really creating a prison population that is just for high risk, really high risk people. And it's kind of driven by a belief, and it's a very widely held view, that prisons are a very expensive way of making people worse rather than making them better. And she's kind of come to that view through a lot of the work and the charities that she set up. So one of the charities she set up, which we had a interesting experience going to visit, was the Clink. I don't know if you're aware of the Clink restaurants, but they're a series of fine dining restaurants that are set within prisons, and it's essentially a training program that gives practical skills, and it's a part of a rehabilitation process for people within prison with 6 to 18 months left on their sentence, where they can learn a whole series of skills and serve incredible food within the prison itself. Highly recommend a visit if you get the chance. She's also got extensive experience in trauma-informed practice, and trauma-informed practice is essentially a type of counselling that allows somebody to understand various traumas that might have happened in their lives, and to understand how that has led to behaviors of theirs that may have led to criminal activity. So I think there can be a tendency where if somebody has ended up in the courts, or being sentenced with something, or ending up in prison, that they are deemed a criminal. There's a whole sort of series of language that gets banded around in relation to having a prison sentence. But actually, if you take it a step back, all of those that whole journey has led potentially from a trauma in somebody's life. So the work that she does at One Small Thing is a series of training programs that allows prison staff to train people in prison, and then prisoners can train other prisoners about the trauma-informed approach. So it's a train-the-trainer process, and it's within both the male prison sector and the female prison sector. And all of it is based on the trauma training of the Dr. Stephanie Covington, who's a kind of specialist from America on this process. And so she's currently doing this across the country, but she came to us and said that she's interested in us exploring what an alternative to prison could be, and what are the alternative ways that you could divert people that don't really need to be in prison. And it's kind of based on a whole kind of well-known set of statistics that haven't really changed over the last few years, that there's so many people, or a lot of people in prison, that shouldn't really be there. So of a typical year, you might have, up to 68,000 people in prison, but over 70% have committed non-violent offences, and almost half are in there for under 6 months. And then there's over 10% that might just be on remand. So there is really sort of case to be made for there's people in there that shouldn't really be in there. And one of the biggest aspects of when you do go in prison is the impact, the knock-on impact it has on the rest of your life, the knock-on impact of being able to get a job, being able to look after your children, and many prospects get cut, you could say, from a prison sentence. And many people end up in prison as a symptom of trauma. So there's also statistics about the amount of people, so around 45% of people in prison have experienced abuse as children, and at least 20% that might have received mental health treatment a year before going into custody. So so really understanding the kind of situations people are in that lead them to come into prison. So she was interested in creating an alternative place that was based around trauma-informed support. So the specialism that she really is leading across the prison population now in the country. And if we created this place, could it eventually lead to reducing the prison population? And put very simply, this is a sort of diagram on the left of what we have now, where you've got everybody that is able to live independently. We have this prison sector, and then we have a very small bubble, which are alternatives to that process. And really what she wanted to do was to really expand what those alternatives could be to help people, and to really shrink that prison bubble to really, for the people that have really done something horrifically wrong, and otherwise we shift to a sort of caring model. And it was really an idea of diversion. And one of the quotes she said to us was, we think it's normal to be kind to people, but why is it normal to be kind? Why is it not normal to be kind to people in need? Which was really the starting point for what we were looking at. So the kind of thing that we wanted to do was look at a place that could take people on a better path. And it was thinking about what is the point where in somebody's journey would you want to find that kind of change in direction? And really, we knew that it might happen after somebody had experienced some kind of trauma in their lives, but it wanted to be before there was an escalation to going into prison. So we were looking at a place where you could essentially be sentenced to this place rather than a prison. So it would be a point where around the point where magistrates could sentence people. And if you take this even further, you would think you would want to be able to impact people as early on as possible as you could. The later you leave it, the worse things happen. And we set up a team to help us do this. So we set up a series of team members that all had relevant expertise. So instead of a design team where you might have a structural engineer and a services engineer, we had quite a different team of specialists. So we had legal specialists, we had a funding specialist, we had a research specialist who could help us make the justification of why this was necessary and what the statistics would be if something like this happened. We had somebody who could help us look at organizational structures for how this could work. We had somebody who could look at how if a pilot was set up, how it could be tested and evaluated to make sure that it's there would be a belief that it actually works. And then we had other people like on the communication side that could help us tell the story of what this place was going to do, because how you talk about a place like this is really important, and trying not to use certain kinds of language that makes people jump to assumptions of the kind of place it might be. And we went on a process of a sort of journey of meeting a whole range of people within the industry of what the alternative to prison is. And that alternative is, a lot of it is around places like women's centres. And women's centres is something, again, that Edwina is a kind of very, very knowledgeable and connected with. And so we would have one-to-one interviews and sessions with people who had been in prison, people who had gone on a journey of transformation through a women's centre, one-to-one sessions with magistrates, with people who had run prisons, female prisons and male prisons, and people who had gone on the full journey from being in prison to being one of the expert support carers in women's centres. So a kind of full transformational process. Then we kind of synthesized all this information and pulled together a proposal for what the pilot could be. And this is just some of the places and the sessions and the kind of places that we went to, and it really was an incredible journey of looking at how this whole sector worked. And the more we looked at the sector, the more we realized that it is it's a bit like a galaxy of organizations. So there's many charities that exist to help people onto a better path and to divert them from going into prison and down into criminal behavior. But they are charities that are typically underfunded and are struggling to survive and are not necessarily connected in a particularly strong way, but they do absolutely incredible work. And we realized that the charities that of the kind of whole world of charities that exist out there, that you could almost categorize them into 4 groups. And we were thinking about 4 groups that this pilot would need. And you could categorize them into the idea of a place that helped like a home or a refuge, and that provided a place to stay. Places that charities that provided expert support, whether it was in drug addiction, in alcohol addiction, whether it was in dealing with domestic abuse. So really kind of expert trauma support there. There was an element of learning. So we called this the sort of academy group, where it was learning new skills and training people to get new kind of new qualifications or new direction in their life. And then there was charities that helped this idea of a transition to independent living. So that could be things like helping people with their financial services or how to navigate the job system, and really allowing people to live an independent life. And we looked at how actually it would be brilliant if there was a place that almost had all those 4 categories together in one place: the idea of home, learning, academy, transition to independence, and expert support in one place, but that actually connected to all the existing charities, so that whatever pilot we come up with doesn't threaten or compete with all the other charities that exist. In a way, it wants to strengthen those that exist. It doesn't want to diminish them in any way. And we sort of looked at this mothership model, where we would have a place that in the very center would be this kind of this sanctuary, this place of healing, this home where you could get expert support. And when you feel up to it, you can then start to open out to learning. And then when you feel strong enough, you can look at that, get that support to live independently, and all the while having access to the great plethora of charities that exist. So that was the kind of model we were looking at. And thinking about the bigger picture, it was really thinking about the setting of how, we have had great support networks in the past, whether it's really strong family networks or faith networks. Oh, hello. Sorry. No, sorry, I thought that was a question. Support networks, whether it's libraries or community centres or even pubs, can act as a support network, but all of those have kind of ended up being in some way in decline or fragmenting or shifting online. So the result is that people have increasingly nowhere to turn to. And when you put that in the context of the you could say austerity that has shrunk local authorities' ability to meet these demands, the idea of somebody going down a bad path and not actually knowing that these independent initiatives or these charities exist is really, really common. So for many of the women that we spoke to, they said, if only I'd known that this charity existed earlier, if only I'd known this at this point in my life, not when everything had gotten to the worst point. And so thinking about how we can help and get that support to people early enough to avoid the point when they get too far down the line. And also thinking that many of us want to help. So everybody, we think in in your community, in your social network, would want to help in some way, but it's not clear how we could, even though we know that these things happen in our society. So we explored creating a place, and this is what the pilot would be. And that place had to have a very welcoming entrance. So it would be not in a sort of tucked away place in some community where nobody can find it. It would actually be in a public place. It could be off a high street, or it could be off a residential street. And there would be an invitation for the public to come in. There would be then a heart space, so a universal space that advocates respect and kindness. So when you go in there, this is very much like what it feels like to walk into a Maggie's Centre, that you know this is a place that you could receive help. And there would be places within there where you can access information and hear stories of of um, of places where you can receive help. Then they would be connected, this heart space would be connected to social enterprises. So what we've found is many of the charities that exist are actually social enterprises in their own right. So it could be a women's centre that runs its own bakery that provides jobs and an income stream as well that supports itself. Or and some of those these are some of the organizations that we met. So it's a youth theatre program. There's the Make It Right bags that connects art students with people in prison designing products. Then there would be a learning aspect to it. So there would be a place to learn new skills, a library, workshops, and training aspects. So these are some of the organizations we met. That so the E5 Bakehouse is the example of the bakery that is also working with people who have been homeless. And then there would be the expert support section where you could get group sessions, one-on-one sessions, and also there could be a unit in there that is monitoring the success, or the how successful this place is. And in success, it is monitoring basically the transformation of people and whether they're able to live independent lives. And then there would be this element of accommodation, so the home aspect, where there would be a place for people to stay. It would be based around communal living, and there would be a garden, and there would be childcare facilities as well, so that people could stay there with their children as well. It's one of the biggest issues, is being sentenced to prison and being separated from children. And a model for this is the Nelson Trust, which is one of the best women's centres in the country that runs a sort of residential model just like this. And what we realized is, for a pilot like this to work, actually the most important thing was for an organization to be set up before any pilot could begin. There had to be an organization that could pull all of this together and to really orchestrate who would be in there, who were the organizations that would come and be hosted within this pilot, and make the whole support network work, and also make sure that the staff are able and have the expertise to give the support that's needed. And that organization could then implement these centres UK-wide, you could say, but what would be really important is to tailor it to local provisions. So say, for example, this could be a base case where you've got all the aspects that we talked about. And this would be in a place where the existing scenario wouldn't have a large amount of existing support. So you would need to bring in the learning, the expert support, the home, and the social enterprise. But if you're within an area that already has a brilliant and a very well established local educational initiative, then you don't have to have that part to the hub, because you can connect to that locally. So you're tailoring the centres to work with whatever expertise you have. So you could have another example where you might be in the county where the Nelson Trust exists, so you don't need the accommodation, but you would have all the other elements. So we're trying to think of a model that could adapt itself. And so the outcome of this project was really summarizing this in sort of animation that we did, where we took 4 day in the life of how somebody would use a center. We then worked with a writer to write a manifesto of why the center was being set up, what it needed, and how it could actually happen. And this is where we worked together with the illustrator and the graphic artist to create the manifesto. And then we talked about whether there would be a sort of campaign film that would raise awareness for what the place would be in order to raise funding and to make it happen. And from that project, after about a year of digesting, Edwina came back to us and was reflecting on how she could make this happen, and came back to us saying that she wanted to go ahead with the first pilot centre, and that she had to think about who the organisation could be to run it, and she wanted it to be her charity One Small Thing to run the pilot. And the charity already has the training arm that is doing the training UK wide across prisons. It also has the Justice podcast, which is a series of podcasts around the justice system. And then there would be a third arm, which she has called Hope Street, and Hope Street is the name of these of the pilot centre, and what she hopes will be a series of centres across the country in the future. And so the name of the pilot is called Hope Street. And what she asked us was to write a design guide for the first pilot that she wanted to build in Southampton. So she wanted to build it in the place where she lives. So rather than building it in London or a big city, it was thinking about where's closest to home. And there is a real need for a place like this in Southampton. And she asked us to write an aspirational brief that when she selected a local architect to commission the building, that they would then read this brief, and it would have ideally the values and the kind of spirit of the place that she wanted to have within it. So part of the brief explains the process of how somebody would arrive at Hope Street. So one of the things in the Reinvent project that we kind of uncovered was that it was absolutely critical to have a choice to go there. So so in this diagram, the person in red is the person who's being sentenced. The kind of red identifies some kind of trauma, you could say. So this person is in the courts and is being faced with a sentence, and that could either be a prison sentence or a sentencing to Hope Street, and that person has a choice. And I should say the pilot is based, it's a women-only pilot, but the idea is thinking that if the process works for women, then it should be able to work for men as well. And that is something which the doctor I mentioned before, Dr. Stephanie Coffington, believes is a very kind of sound testing principle for something to work. So the next step in the process is you would be sentenced to Hope Street, and that Hope Street is essentially a hub building, and that you would be taken from the courts by somebody who works at Hope Street and explained what is going to happen to you, and explained what the choices you've got. Once you make that choice, you're then taken there, and you're able to stay there with your children. So if you have children, you don't have to be separated from them. You can then receive the care, support, and that kind of sentence period while you're living with your children. And from that point, they're in the process of looking at how long that period might be, but to give you a feel, it might be for around 3 to 6 months. And then once you've been there, you can then move on to a place that has less support in it. So they have a series of houses that are connected to the hub. And that's where members from the Hope Street staff network can come and visit you and your children living there, and you can still receive some of the support that you still need that you were receiving at the hub. And then eventually you go to independent living out in the place that you live. So this is the model where you've got the hub and houses. So you've got the central hub, they connect to houses across the county. And so this diagram is showing that really you would have one hub per county, and then the houses would be existing properties or existing flats or whatever kind of accommodation it would be that would be associated with the hub and allowed you to live elsewhere in the county once you've had a certain amount of time in the hub. And then assuming that was successful, then that county-wide approach could then extend throughout the country. And one of the first things we did was we worked with them on a series of values for the centre, and these values were much for the place and the building as they were for the people. So it was also in a way a document that would help anybody not just designing this building, but who would also be working there to understand what the spirit of the place is. And then just I've taken a kind of few extracts of the document that we pulled together, but in terms of the thinking that we did for the hub building, we basically said we thought about what are the elements that makes places intimidating or feel institutional. And this was learning from all the discussions that we'd had with women who had been through this experience. So in the design guide, what it says is, rather than having one single building for the centre, it should really be an arrangement of buildings, a cluster of buildings with a sort of village-like feel, so that you don't enter into one large single kind of dominating or intimidating building. And then we had to look at how the spaces were arranged. So there has to be a very careful arrangement of and balance of public and private. So you have the people that live there, and often sometimes the women that might be coming to the centre would have there would be restraining orders out for men in their lives potentially, and so there is a very private aspect to this building. And then, but the importance is that there is a connection to the public. So there would be areas, the cafe and the entrance heart area where the public can come in. There's then an area where visitors can come and visit family members or friends that are receiving treatment at the centre. And then there's a staff area where obviously that connects to every aspect. And then we went through kind of bit by bit of the centre, working out how theoretically one of these centres might work. So in terms of arrival, we realised that actually there had to be 3 types of arrival spaces. There was the kind of warm, welcoming, open entrance that would be off the street where anybody could come in and receive help. There would also be a secondary entrance where if you're you might have just been sentenced from the courts, you might be in not a good state, and it's a very kind of discreet, quiet entrance where people can come in to a safe place. And then there was a third kind of entrance where if you live there and you're coming in and out, there's a discreet way for you to come in and out to the residential accommodation. So all of that was described in there. There was then the private rooms where you would receive one-to-one counselling, and this was very much like the group counselling and one-to-one counselling, and had a lot of parallels with the kind of spaces within the Maggie Centre, where you would have people that ideally would feel able to open up to difficult experiences. And the idea was that there would be no kind of typical office furniture. The type of interior feeling, the setting had to be very, the way it's written is to be very sort of homely, and to not have any kind of institutional feel whatsoever. And then looking at places, the kind of shared living clusters. So one of the aspects that we learned through some of the exemplary women's centres that had residential accommodation, there's very much an idea of communal living. And the communal living aspect is to learn how to respect others. So even something as simple as having a shared bathroom, you have to learn to tidy up after yourself. You have to learn to respect the next person coming in. So there was no kind of private bathrooms in here. They're shared, to learn those kinds of skills as well, and having respect for others. So they're designed to be shared living clusters that can accommodate women with their family, with their children, and can also accommodate women who might have, for very good reason, had to be separated from the children, and acoustically can't hear other children around, so that's not upsetting to them as well. So there's a kind of design in that aspect. Then we talked about having a particular room or rooms in the centre that are really for the most special type of counselling, which is the trauma-informed counselling, where you uncover the traumas in your life and how they've affected your behavior. And so we called these the hope rooms. So each centre would have one hope room, if not more. And as these buildings might have, they might not have a huge budget, but it was thinking about where, if there was to be an incredibly special place in that centre, this would be one of the rooms where you would dedicate a lot of care and attention to, so that it becomes a really a warm and inviting and kind of almost like a sacred place to be in. So we talked about relationship with the outside, a relationship to a garden looking with views out to nature, and also with an element of privacy to it. Then there was workspace for the staff that had to have outdoor space as well, and certain criteria for people that work there, given that they will also be dealing with traumatic situations in their day-to-day work. And then looking at what the gardens and outdoor spaces had to be. And one of the key things about having a hub that had not just one building, but multiple buildings and the ability to go in and outside of buildings, outdoor and indoor again, was this whole idea of removing corridors, removing institutional elements, and getting that sense of perspective in the outdoors environment. And then we wrote about how this kind of feel and this approach should also replicate in some way in the houses that would be out in the community that would connect back to the hub. And then the final part of the design guide was 2 written stories. And this is really about setting the scene for any designer coming onto the project about who are the people that will be using this building, what are the kinds of experiences they might have had in their lives, and what is the kind of experience they would have in this building. So Edwina had at this point already secured who would be the centre head, who would run the centre, and she wrote 2 stories of 2 women, Julie and Louise. And these are stories that talk about essentially their family life, their life leading up to the point of being sentenced, and then the experience of being sentenced all the way through to arriving at Hope Street for the first time, through to the kind of care they would receive, through to them then leaving the centre and moving on out to the houses and out to independent living. And so it was a really interesting aspect to include in the design guide of these user journeys. Actually, user is not a good term to word, but in a personal journey of how this building would transform somebody's experience. And then just finally, just to tell you where the project is now. So this is Edwina on the site that she acquired about 1.5 years ago. And demolition has just started. So she has used the design guide and worked with a local architect in Southampton to commission this centre. So this will be the first pilot. You can see it's a cluster of buildings, not one building, and it's got planning permission, and the demolition is starting now. So hopefully there should be a centre up and running by 2022. And we're kind of working with Edwina on, in a way, just having a kind of peer review of how the design guide has worked and how it's influencing what the first pilot will be. And she's interested in how the design guide has evolved as each centre is built. And just to end, this is one of the sort of landscape illustrations that the team has done. So that's that's a kind of summary of a project that we've done, which is I guess it's not necessarily a building project, but it is around the idea of how architecture can address or go to some way to look into the social issues that we have. So yeah, any questions? I'm more than welcome to take.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that lecture. It was really interesting to see how everything, like the design guide and everything. We don't have any questions in the chat box, but we would just like to ask everyone if they had anything to say. You guys can come talk to Lisa.
I see no faces. There's no cameras on.
Oh, Gustavo, would you like to ask your question yourself, or would you like us to ask?
Oh, sure. Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture, Lisa. I really appreciate it. I guess my 2 questions are, what precedents, if I missed it, what precedents or history are you drawing from that you're making your design proposal, and then statistics, like what probabilities are you working with that are making this design possible for you right now, this vision?
Okay. So if we start with the precedents, I think the precedents that we were starting from were really from the existing women's centres that are already operating. So they, in a way, are testing. Some of them are already testing the ideas that are being looked at in Hope Street, but in a way, what Hope Street is doing is taking some of the best of those and putting them all in one place together, you could say. So the idea of having residential accommodation as where you receive expert care already exists, but there isn't a mechanism to have that as a sentence. And so I think that where we're suggesting something new is that it's a way of getting people to that kind of expert help sooner, you could say. And I think in terms of the statistics, so for Edwina to hone in on one part of the country to look at where the pilot would be, her and her team did research on the prison population, where women were being sentenced from and to within that area, and also what the needs were, what were the kind of issues that led to the sentencing. So was it predominantly drugs, was it predominantly abuse, because each area has its own kind of prevalent issues. And it seemed that within the area that she's looking at within Southampton, there was a definite need, and there was a definite desire to have a place for this in that county, and that they could identify a kind of a number of women a year. So I think it was I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there was a stream of women, so within the hundreds, that would need to be at this centre each year. So the need was justified. What then they have to do is to basically monitor how people use the service and how effective it is. And places like the Nelson Trust already do this. So the women's centres often partner with universities to have academics basically monitor, interview progress of how somebody is at the beginning of treatment and how they are at the end, and then what happens afterwards. And it's quite a long process of evaluating. It can be many years. So to prove its effectiveness can take about a 5-year period. But the more evidence there is, the more this kind of approach can be adopted. Often trying to get the evidence can be an expensive process. And often if you are a charity that is underfunded, that is struggling to provide the basic service, expert service that you have, you might choose to continue to do that service rather than to pay for getting the evidence-based research that you need. So that's often why in this sector, the evidence is difficult to come by, but everybody knows that it works. So I think that's why what Edwina is trying to do is also build in the evidence tracking within the pilot.
Lisa, thank you very much for your wonderful answer. Just a follow-up, how does this proposed model scale to different countries? And is that part of your future work? Are you looking at other countries that are similar to the system that you're building it for? Or how do you kind of see this research scaling?
Well, I think for I know from Edwina's point of view, she's looking at really testing. It's like proof of concept. So get the first one operating, and then honing it in a way that ideally a local authority can take the model and run it themselves. So at the moment, this is independently funded. It's not government funded, but the idea is that this should be a model and a place that could be government funded if it's proven to be successful. So I think in terms of a bigger goal, the goal is less looking at scaling to other countries, but looking at the funding model so that this becomes a viable model that a local authority could execute. And that's why it also has things like connections with social enterprise, where there's a means of generating income, and there's a means of being able to have some form of income that allows it to be a self-sustaining model, because otherwise it's at risk. In a way, it could be at risk of further cuts. It wants to be a model that is self-sustaining.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you so much for that. If anyone else, does anybody else have any questions before? Okay, well, I kind of had a question. Well, I just wanted to ask you, like, obviously you guys prepared the design guide and there was a local architect working on the actual plans and stuff, but was there any, in terms of the design development, did they kind of come back to you with ideas and did you give them ideas? Like, was there like a collaboration aspect or was it just like giving them the design guide, giving them an idea?
No,
and
it was more letting the design, using it as a brief. So they took the brief and then they developed the design, and then what we're doing so it's the design, so I think it's demolition now and it's moving into construction, but we are like I said, a kind of peer review. So one of the things that we said that we would check in on with Edwina is thinking about places like the Hope Street, the Hope Room, and where is that being placed. So we would do a kind of review now and again to see if there's any any aspects we think should be different or not. But it's really for Edwina to take or not take, really. And I think she's interested to see how the design guide works. How does it work on its own? And she's open to us. What she wants to do is at the end of the process to reflect on how it's worked, and then would there be anything that she would change to it, having gone through the process to the end. How would you change it for the next one? What aspects would you keep? What aspects would you add things, or maybe you simplify it? And we did talk about the document being of use to both architects, but also to basically anybody in the chain of working on that project to make it happen, so that they all understand how it's being used. Because it is kind of the typology of a women's centre exists, but this type is a different one. And so knowing what it is and knowing what the goal of the place is, it's really important that people have an idea of what that is when they're working on that project, whether it's just procuring the seating or whether it's the landscape or whatever it is. So the fact that we tried to get all of that into a document felt very important. But yeah, we're really interested to see how it is getting used. That's going to be super interesting for us to see.
Yeah, and for sure, I think for students as well to kind of learn from that process would be really interesting. And then Cameron has a question. Do you want to ask it yourself, or?
Yeah, hi. I just want to ask if the purpose of Hope Street was meant as a means of giving people professional help, like in the centre, or whether it was in order to stop them reoffending, or whether it was meant as a sort of middle ground or refuge, like on the sort of on the track to getting professional help.
No, it is so it is. The centre provides expert support, so you could say that is professional help. It is they have access to medical support, to a whole suite of counselling, and in a way, if you think about the spectrum of needs that somebody might have, from whether it's substance abuse to financial issues to navigating the housing system, all of those things can be you can get support from there. So it is the place that you would get that kind of support. And then it's the place where you can meet, it would be a place where you can meet people that then, once some of the most acute needs have been addressed, you can then look forward to what is the next step. So there, within the same place, is organizations or places where you can learn new skills, or you can connect with a place where you might be able to have a job in the future, whether it's a social enterprise like the E5 Bakery or whatever it is. And those, so it's meant to provide that, as much of that spectrum of support as possible in one place. And if it's not all under one roof, then it has the means to connect you with whoever does provide that support locally. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
All of those things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa, for the lecture. I, for myself, just wanted to ask, do you think if any of those ideas could be applied in actual prisons, like the people that maybe wouldn't be allowed to kind of choose the hub other than the prison? Is there anything that you think can be incorporated?
Yeah, I think there is. I think some of the, what's interesting about some of the organizations that we met and the services that they provide, they are already, some of them are already provided in prisons. But I think what is missing in a way is the combination of that kind of support and the environment and the setting that it's within. And I think the idea of people, I don't know, a wider understanding of how support can be received in a setting and the way within which it's received is can be so crucial to its effectiveness. So, for example, the way that you might first go into Hope Street from a court, the idea that you are welcomed into a small space, that's somebody meets you one-to-one, you have a kind of conversation in a small room to understand what the main what the main issues are, is something that is in a way not, it's not always the process that happens in the other direction. And so I think what this project is trying to do is I guess it's instilling all those trauma-informed processes through every step of the journey. And I think there's ways that the trauma-informed process could be absolutely more included in prisons. But I suppose the goal would be, as kind of from the beginning of the project, if this is successful, then the focus and need for prisons becomes less and more acute. The focus is different, you could say, because you realize that actually it's much more about supporting and identifying trauma and needs in people and getting them back on track, rather than a punishment. So it's a different kind of process.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions? You can still type in the chat box. We have last few minutes, so any last questions are welcome.
While they do that, Lisa, we just wanted to say thank you once again for like doing this for us and introducing this whole idea to us. And I think because as students, it's really interesting to take this design brief and apply it to our own projects soon enough. So thank you so much for introducing
It's
all
all
these
right.
ideas.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you
Yeah,
very
thank
much
you
for inviting us. Yeah, hope it works with the theme.
Yeah, it works
So,
very well. I also
Gustavo,
feel like we don't often get to hear kind of so many details about the project before it's even built. So I think that was something really special for all of us here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting for us as well, because we're seeing how this process works, so we don't quite know what the outcome will be, and we're seeing the effectiveness of it, and we hope it's we hope it's going to turn out really well. But I suppose it's so important to see, the other, what Edwina's busy with now is designing the service. So we realized how important the service is, and the organization that runs the service inside, that's so important. So she's very, very busy with that now, making sure that all of that can be delivered, and lots of connecting with the local authority and the magistrates and all of that to make the setup work. But we'll see how it goes.
Gustavo just asked, and I think everyone probably has this question on their mind, if we could follow up on like any research that happens or references, and in the future how we can support these efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we should we can send you a few links maybe after this to the different organizations related to the project. And then I think there's also I also think on the One Small Thing website, there are some really interesting podcasts as well around the issues that, coming back to the question of the need and the justification of it. It really hits home as to why this is something that we should have in our communities. And in a way, it's crazy that we don't it makes you realize how crazy it is, yeah, that these kinds of places don't already exist.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
we just got a link to the organization if everyone wants to follow up on that. And if we get more links, we'll circulate it on the SAWSA Instagram and YouTube. So you guys can go check out the research and everything that happens. But yeah, Lisa, thank you so much. And
That's
I know
all right.
you have to go. So
Yeah, good luck with the rest of your studies. Hope you get out and back to back to the university soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much
Yeah.
again. Thank you
All right.
for everyone who came. And there's lots of thank yous coming in the chat box as well. So
Oh, I'm not seeing the chat. Okay, good. Good. All right. Thanks very much.
that's how everyone really liked it. Thank you very much again.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.